Mark, thank you so much for jumping on with us today and telling us a bit about your story. You have a very interesting job. That's why I wanted to have you on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, your story, and how you ended up in your career?
Okay, cheers, man. Thanks a lot for having me as well. I really appreciate it. So it starts off. I'm originally from down south, in the south of England, and then around sort of 2006, I moved up into the Midlands, where I am now. And there, after a couple of other sort of little jobs, I joined the fire service in late 2006, and that was my sort of role really as a firefighter for 17 years nearly. And then during that time, I picked up a couple of qualifications and became a PT, and so I did that sort of a little bit for the service in terms of like the annual tests. Then I got the job as the fitness advisor for my region's fire service, and that's what I've been doing sort of pretty much since then, really.
Yeah, I know we spoke before, and I mean, it sounds like you've had a great career. Do you have anyone in your family who is a first responder? Like, do you have any police, fire, medical, or are you the first person that got into the service?
Not really. No, I'm the first. Me dad was in the army years ago, but that was like pre me, really. So a long time ago. So I never sort of knew him as in the army, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But no, I'm the first, which is weird. The most of my family are pretty mundane, sort of. Well, I say mundane, but sort of valuable jobs, but sort of factory workers and odd job
Normal
people,
jobs.
normal
Yeah.
people. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So no,
I
it is a
got you.
bit. I am a bit of the outlier, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of the time you see families, they kind of follow a trend. So if they have a lot of military in the family, sometimes the kids, the grandkids, they'll all be military. Or if they have, a lot of law enforcement, a lot of police, fire, they kind of go in that trend too. So it's always interesting when you see someone who kind of is the first person to take that step. And then do you have kids, by the way?
Yeah, yeah. So I got two. One, so I got a 19-year-old lad, and then I've
Okay.
got a stepdaughter as well, who's 19.
Have any of them spoken any interest going into fire, police, anything like that?
No, not really. No. So my lad, he's really big into sport, a big sort of rugby player. He's at uni at the moment. I think he's going to go down like the sports science route. So I suppose he's taken that the other side of me job, like me and my other job I've got as an online coach.
Yeah.
He seems more interested in that side than the fire side. But I suppose because again, as you say, it's normally a family thing. But then I suppose it's normal for him as well. So he hasn't got any of the excitement of the firefighter role and all that because like to him, I'm just dad, so it's not as exciting to see fire engines and all that because that's been part of his life ever since he
Yeah.
was born. So maybe he hasn't got that sort of that looks exciting because he knows I'm just sort of boring old dad.
Yeah, he associates it with you. No, that's really interesting when you kind of say it like that. That he's, I'm sure kids of anyone who's a kind of first responder service role, they do probably get just kind of adjusted to how it's kind of normal. They're
Mm.
used to you. But I'm really interested in talking to you. I really like talking to anyone who's done any kind of first responder work or any kind of service work. Just to see the mindset and really, I mean, we all know inherently any type of job like that is a dangerous job, right? When you're dealing with people, fire, medical, crashes, anything that you might run into day to day, there's always some kind of danger there. It's just inherently a high risk job. What do you think it was about you and your personality that attracted you to that kind of job?
I think it was the variety, if I'm honest, because I went to uni. I worked in HR for a bit down south, then I got a job in social services up here, but it was only an admin job really. So, and I realised pretty soon that's not what I wanted to do for like the rest of my life. So I think the variety of it was the biggest attraction, and you're not sat in one place. I think as well having because so my son was born in 2005 and I started in 2006. Obviously, he was only a year old, and obviously the shift work, or as stressful as it was, I mean, I was only early 20s then, so it wasn't as bad as it is now. And I'm an old man, but so like the shift work was great because I got to see loads of my lads sort of growing up. So if I had a 9 till 5 sort of job, I would have, I would probably would have been gone by the time he's awake, and then yeah, be in bed by the time I come home. So I got, and that's the bit I'm sort of proudest of as outside the job is I was really sort of active when he was younger, where a lot of people sort of get to miss that out. So that was the two main things. But it's weird when I think it's the naivety of the young. It's a dangerous job, and you've read about the horror stories and stuff like that. But it's always one of those things. It's the same as, not that I'm comparing myself to an F1 driver or anything as cool as that, but they probably like they know it's a risk, but it won't ever happen to me because of A, B, and C, or it's one of those things. I know it can happen, but and it was the same sort of thing. It didn't really cross my mind. It was only when I was older and I look back on some of the things I was involved in, and you think, oh, blimey, that was a bit hairy. Do you know what I mean? So the danger didn't really. I wouldn't ever consider myself like I knew about the danger and I'm a big hero and I just wanted. It wasn't anything like that. I suppose I was just sort of too young and naive to consider it really. I suppose.
Yeah. Do you think it's more of like you're really just kind of living in the moment, like you don't really have time. You're so focused on what you're doing, and I'm sure there was a lot of training which I want to talk about. So, with the training that you had, you probably feel like you're pretty much capable of handling really anything. I would say that you're going to run into on a daily basis. Was that the mindset? Like no matter what we run into, we know there's ways to handle it. We have training, we have procedures that we're going to follow. So it would take something really crazy for something like for me to get hurt.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. That's where, and you sort of got that on the training course pretty quickly because obviously the course is run by experienced firefighters. So you have the books are sort of learning, and this is exactly. It's a bit like sort of learning to drive. There's a right way to do it, and you're taught, the textbook way, if you like. But pretty soon you realise that often goes out the window because the environment is so unpredictable. Like you can train as much as you want, but the environment and the stress and the trauma of what's going on, it throws like your standard sort of training out the window. So you quickly learn to. I mean, a famous phrase in the UK for firefighters, I presume it's the same in America, is improvise and adapt, and that's kind of what the job involves. Like you know how to use all the equipment, in the basic way of doing it. But often, sort of using an example of like a car accident, for example, like you'll do the bulk of your training when the car's on all fours. You've got sort of plenty of space around the car, so you can all sort of move around and cut doors off and take your time and all that, and it goes to plan sort of most of the time. But obviously, in the real life, cars are upside down. They're in a ditch. Like the weather could be bad, and you're traipsing around in mud, and the car is sort of sunk into the ground because the weather's that bad, and things like that. Which means you can't do the normal sort of techniques you do. So you just kind of find a way. And I think that's one of the. I think all first responders. That's kind of what they do. Like there's a textbook way of doing it, but I think the best sort of firefighters, the best sort of policemen, the best in the military is dealing with those sort of situations that sort of throw you off, and you go, "Oh crap! Excuse the swearing. I didn't realise, that I can't do the A, B, and C. I might have to do E, D, F, and like etc." So it's always having that plans A to Z, really, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, a full alphabet of strategies you can use for different
Yeah.
situations. I do want to know a little bit about the training. Like, what was that like for you? You decided, hey, this is something I want to do. I'm guessing you apply. Is it online? Do you have to go somewhere? Is it a college? Where do you guys learn, and what's their training like?
It's quite a drawn out process, really. I think for a couple of reasons. I think because the amount of applicants. I mean, when I applied, the numbers have gone down slightly now, but when I applied, there was a couple of thousand of people that applied. I can't remember the exact sort of number, but there was a lot for like say sort of 15, 16 jobs. So the process is so it all starts with an online application form, which is pretty basic. There isn't any sort of tricky sort of questions. And then you go on to sort of, in my day, it was exams where I had to go to headquarters and do exams. There was three exams. I forget the actual ins and outs. Like I say, it was 20 years ago, so it's a long time ago. But there was like a reason in one where there wasn't necessarily a right or wrong answer, but you kind of, it would put you in a scenario and you had to sort of explain your way out of it and what are your priorities in that sort of situation and why you would do A, B, and C. And then there was more of like a maths equation type one, and then like an English sort of written one. But that was in person when I did it. Now all that is online, and they've changed that sort of structure slightly. But then there was the fitness test, and then so once you pass the fitness test, then it's the job related test. So that's the more tests involved with the job, and you're using sort of equivalent or bits of kit that's actually on the fire truck. And then those sort of tasks are timed. Then right at the very end of that, then there's the interview where it's like a face to face with people as a normal job. So it's quite sort of drawn out. It's quite intense. Most people, because of there's lots of hurdles to jump. Most people take 2, 3, 4, and even sort of longer sort of attempts to kind of get in. I mean, on my course, there was someone who tried 7 times, and like he got in on the 8th attempt. But because the amount of people, they can afford to be sort of choosy. I mean, I got in first time, but that isn't a brag. But I think it's because I went in and I spoke to people and they sort of told me that I went in quite relaxed, thinking, well, I'm never going to get in first time, so I use it as a learning experience. I pick up as much as I can, and then I'll apply again. I think because I'm quite a relaxed person anyway, but because I went in there assuming I wouldn't get it, I got in first time. But I don't know if that helped because I was pretty calm and I wasn't expecting much. But the course itself is When I did it, it was 8 weeks long, which was way too short. Prior to my course, it was up to 16. It sort of changes every year ish. 16, 20, 24 sort of weeks. So they tried to reduce it, but it went to 8 weeks, which was it was way too intense, really. And it was like, you'll spend half a day on the subject, then right, bang, then we're on to the next, then we're on to the next. And you're a bit sort of overwhelmed. So they've changed that now. It's up to 16 weeks. So you've got a bit more sort of breathing space. But yeah, then it's essentially sort of broken into modules. So obviously there's loads of different parts of the job. And you'll have a week on this, a couple of weeks on this, a week on this. So it's quite, there is a lot of momentum in the course, and it's quite full on, really.
Yeah, 8 weeks is crazy. That's not
Yeah,
a long time at all. Two
no.
months to figure everything out. And is there what's the breakdown between like physical training and then like a theory written classwork training? Is it like 50-50, or what's the breakdown?
It's probably sort of 30-60, in the, well, that's not very good maths. You know what I mean? Like a third and two thirds. Most of when it's a new sort of subject, you'll start in the classroom and there'll be a bit of theory behind it. But because a lot of it is tool based and scenario based, there's only so much that you can talk about it and try and explain it. It is better to get out there and get hands on. But there's always like the basic sort of safety stuff, and this is the on switch, this is the off switch. Here's a few sort of like scenarios. Here's what you should do, shouldn't do. So there is like a basic sort of setup, and getting your hands on the kit, sort of maybe like in the lecture room. But the bulk of it, once that is out the way, the bulk of it is just practice, 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 and that's where, again, a plus of the job is, because I went to uni, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. I didn't get the most out of it, and the same with school. Really, I didn't have a horrific experience, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. So it's a great job because it's very sort of practical. I mean, there's a lot, like especially sort of nowadays. There's like, you do sort of. I mean, I did an MVQ, which is what you do in your probation. So there is a lot of paperwork, especially when you start as probationer. And now there's like MVQs. There's a thing called an IFE, which is a specific sort of fire qualification, but it's like an international sort of recognised qualification. So there is a lot of reporting of what you do. You've got to track and log everything, especially at the beginning. So when you become off development, if you like, as like an apprentice, as like a probationer, then you have to do like a piece of work, essentially like sort of coursework, which is quite in depth. But it's the hands-on approach, which I think is a big appeal for the job, and that was sort of what it was like on the course.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In a job where really every day you're dealing with different, situations, you kind of need to at least be aware of how to deal with most of them, right, from the
Exactly.
top. But was it so like we have a police academy and a fire training academy like 20 minutes from where we live, and I still see them when we drive by out there running laps around the building, climbing, jumping, going through the mud and stuff. It obviously looks more like a military camp is the way they do it over here. Is that similar in the UK? Is it still kind of paramilitary? Is there people dropping out? Was there any hazing or things like that, or is it mostly just they're trying to support you to get through?
Yeah, no, we're. I was going to say, sort of use the word behind, but sort of back in the day it was, and when I say back in the day, like I've been in 20 years, so probably sort of 30 for 40 years ago, 100% it was, and they'd go on sort of log runs and things like that. By the time I started, and now really, and it's not a positive thing, but the fitness side isn't a massive thing. There's a big assumption, because you've gone through the recruitment process, you passed the fitness test. There's a lot of assumption, well, they're fit enough, then it's fine. And so a lot of it, the bulk of it is just practical for firefighter training. Personally, I'd like to change that. I think the way that, especially in America, it is great how wherever it's sort of daily, every other day, or at least sort of weekly sort of touch points, that there is assessments, there is sort of fit, because it's such a big part of the job. And the standard of the fitness test, although technically it means you're fit enough to be a firefighter, because there's been a lot of sort of studies on it, when you're really sort of blowing and you're really sort of working really, really hard, that should be the minimum and not the target. So I do think the recruits course should be a lot more intense. Don't get me wrong, there was sort of days where you are really sort of blowing, and it really, especially on like the hose running days, where you're essentially sort of rolling out hose and making it back up, rolling out hose and making it back up. So it becomes a bit of sort of a muscle memory, and you spend the whole day doing that. So it is really physical, and people sort of have collapsed and things, but it would only be for half a day or a day. Whereas I'm a big believer that there should be structured, your fitness should be sort of monitored throughout as well. And some brigades do, so they have a weekly thing, and it's kind of like assessed along the way to make sure that you're progressing. But no, it's not. It's intense mentally, and parts are intense sort of physically, but it's a lot more controlled, I suppose is the word, than a lot of other countries. But that's not necessarily a good thing. I think we should be sort of meeting. And I don't think there's a place for sort of beasting for the sake of it. But you do have to. You are, when you're in the job, there are sort of situations where you are sort of pushing yourself to your absolute sort of max, and like it doesn't happen every day, but you need to know that your body, like, you are prepared for that. So I do think it's something that we need to improve on over here.
Yeah, and I think it's, it's kind of a responsibility of the agency that's training, right? You want the guys who come in to be in a better shape when they leave than when they got in, just because they
100%.
were able to pass the entry exam and go through the training. If they've not improved, they're going to be better at their job for sure with the training. But if they've not improved physically to the point where they can do the job better, it's kind of an important duty that they have, I would say, to make sure these guys come out fit. And then, when they go to leave, I'm sure inside of the different brigades, there's a lot of training, right? And a lot of physicality. Like, I know the police departments around here, they train together all the time. They're going to the gym a couple of days a week, right? They're training. Is it similar over there? Like, when you first left training, got into your first, is it a station house? Is that what you guys call it over there? Or is it a brigade? What do you call, like, the individual districts?
Yeah, so we have sort of stations, and they're just called sort of stations, really. Then they're in, like, 'cause obviously in England we have sort of counties. So my county is Staffordshire, so we'll have our own sort of brigade, and that's where it's a strange. Again, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but although it's the National Fire Service, but you're employed by your sort of local government, so your county. Each one is run so independently, it's crazy. So even like a neighbouring one that's sort of half an hour away, their policies, procedures, and their training, etc., might be completely different, which can be really sort of frustrating sometimes. But yeah, so the fitness once they're out onto station is very dependent on your watch and if they're into it. So if you've got a watch manager who's like in charge of your watch at that station, if they're into fitness and the watch is into fitness, then it's great. Then there's always sort of gym time, and it's always a priority, which is great. If you're on a watch where there's a few older people, say, who aren't into it, and that's not always a linear thing. It doesn't mean because you're older you're not into fitness, but just in general terms. So if you're in a watch where the watch manager isn't overly into his fitness, or he does his own thing out of work, so he's not interested in doing it, then it's often the first thing to fall off the table, or they give you a bit of time at the end of the day. So it's totally dependent on the watch. There isn't anything although we've got time in our contract to train while we're on a duty, it's not essential. So you can't be forced to train or forced to go to the gym. So yeah, but generally I'd say the brigades are pretty good over here.
Okay, yeah.
And there is always time for it.
So talk to me a little bit. You finish the academy, you graduate, I'm sure good feelings, right? A lot of pride to come out of there. And then, you get assigned to your first district, and you're showing up for your first day. What was that like, if you remember?
Scary, I think, was the yeah. I think it's a mixture of everything. There's a lot of relief because, like, you passed and you got through, so it means you can go on to station, and obviously you're excited. But yeah, the nerves. I mean, I'm quite a calm bloke, so I'm a bit like a duck. You know what I mean? When I'm calm on top, I mean, and inside I'm like, oh my god, I'm panicking. So it was a bit sort of nervous. I was quite lucky because I started with someone else as well, so on the same sort of watch. I had someone who was on my course, and we started on the same day. Which was at least we had each other to sort of comfort and ask sort of questions and think, oh, what's that bit of kit again, or what does that do, and things like that. So I was a bit kind of lucky in that, but yeah, it was quite sort of nerve wracking. I was really sort of lucky though, because I went on to Amazing Watch, and it was the humour was like incredible, and they were really sort of clever people, really sort of experienced sort of firefighters, and they did sort of look after us. So it was really good. So I really sort of fell on my feet. I heard some horror stories of other people on my course who went out to other sort of stations, and it was a bit more, I don't want to say the word old school, but they were really sort of beasted and put under loads of pressure, and sort of made to look like sort of fools sometimes, and it went sort of too far. Whereas I was sort of super lucky, and I've been throughout my career really in terms of the watch. But yeah, so we had a couple of, and I had a few good jobs pretty soon that sort of knew if it was me or not, if you know what I mean. I had some sort of interest in sort of deaths and gory things, and different types of jobs, which was because that's the only way that you'll know how you cope, because you can train as much as you like and read about it and watch sort of videos, but until you're like sort of face to face and touching, there isn't like anything sort of tangible. You kind of don't know. So I was quite sort of lucky within the first sort of, I say sort of lucky, that sounds horrible, but within the first sort of couple of months, I've had a good variety of jobs. So then I felt, well, I'm great. I felt all right, and I felt like I can do this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good topic I wanted to kind of go into, because it is a it's kind of the unspoken fact that people, when they want to get into a job, any type of first responder job, they are going to be dealing with these kind of situations that, are pretty traumatic for you to go through as well and for you to deal. So, for how much as you're comfortable sharing, do you remember like the first call you had when you really were tested in that kind of way, where you're like, hey, this is real. Like, this is not an office job. Like, this is something I'm going to be dealing with. And do you remember that kind of internal conversation you had where you're like, hey, I'm a firefighter now. I'm going to be seeing these things. And how did you kind of process that?
Yeah, I remember me first. So after, I would probably say after a couple of weeks, I think I had my first death. My first fatality was actually a relatively good one, and obviously it's never good. And I don't mean that to kind of belittle the story of the person who passed away, but he was he he hung himself off a tree in the middle of a park. So we were called to kind of cut him down. So the police were already there. There wasn't any issue at all, but they couldn't get him down. So they called us to cut him down and put him into a body bag, essentially. So that was it. So on the way, obviously you get a printout on station, and then it explains all that. So it was quite calm. There wasn't a rush because it wasn't to save anyone, because like we knew he'd gone. So in that way, I had a good thing. But obviously, when it's the first time I've ever, even in terms of family or friends, and I've never seen a dead person before. So seeing that, it was very sort of surreal. I didn't panic. I didn't get upset. I didn't like sort of for freak out. It was just very, very strange, I suppose, is the best way, because it's like you say, it's not something you sort of deal with, and you kind of know it's going to happen when you become a firefighter, but until you're there, it's very surreal. So we had a job to do. We cut him down. I was going to say a story. I don't think it's inappropriate, but because I didn't know how sort of bodies react, so we sort of cut him down. We were being as gentle as we can, and like respectful as we can. As we sort of sat him down, so we sat him on his bum first, essentially, then sort of laid it, sort of obviously squeezed air out of his lungs, so he actually went like and he made a noise. I got to tell the truth, I absolutely sort of shit myself because obviously I knew he was dead, and it sounded like a normal noise. And there's sort of little things like that which and his eyes were open, which kind of, because I've only ever seen it in films, so there's always a dramatic scene when they go, oh, and their eyes are closed. So there was a couple of things like that, which I'm glad I went through that in that calm environment, rather than sort of cutting out someone out of a car, or hanging out of a window in a house fire and things like that. So if you're going to deal with death to get your first one, again, I think I was quite sort of lucky because it wasn't a harrowing one. Then yeah, so there obviously sort of since then, it doesn't happen every day, but I'd probably say on average it was probably sort of one a year ish, maybe a bit more, but like on average, and some were worse than others, as you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you, once you would deal with something like that, obviously you go back to the station afterwards. What's the conversations like with the other firefighters who have been there for a long time and they've dealt with this for years? Do they talk to you about it at all? Do they give you any type of, hey, how are you doing? Like, are you dealing with that okay? Or is it just kind of accepted as like, this is part of the job, you need to get used to it?
No, in my experience, it was really good, even from like the watch managers sort of down. There's always like you have like an official sort of debrief on the job. So once wherever the incident, if it's a big job and everyone's gone away in the ambulances and everything's to sort of calm down, you'll have like they called it like a hot debrief. So everyone sort of stands in a circle and there's a bit of an instant sort of debrief where whoever was in charge of the job just goes through a couple of good things, a couple of bad things, if it was a sort of learning points and blah blah blah. So, but then when you come back on station, then there's like it's not called this at all, but it's like an informal sort of debrief. So you also sit down, you probably have a brew, and then you just sort of talk about it. And that's such a good thing sort of mentally, because it's a bit of a decompression, and there's a bit of sort of mickey taking, there's a bit of sort of jokes, which from the outside it may seem a bit inappropriate. It's not a joke about the individual, obviously, but it looks like, if anyone was sort of filming it, it looks like we're all taking it sort of light-hearted, where in fact it's like a coping mechanism. And it's sort of soft levels sort of counselling in a way, because we've all sort of been through it. We all sort of ask questions, especially at the beginning when I just wanted to learn. So my first question was, could I have done anything sort of better or different, or and things like that, so that you're always trying to make sure that you're doing the right thing. But that is such a big thing in the fire service, and I imagine it's the same with the police, ambulance, even like the military and things. It's that community that's the biggest thing, really. And that kind of helps you. There is outside support as well, if for really traumatic incidents, but that immediate sort of watch support is really great, and nobody takes it sort of lightly because it's such an individual thing how you react. I've coped, I think, sort of relatively well. Whether I'm going to have like a breakdown in 10 years' time, I don't know. I've sort of taken it on the chin a little bit, and I've I can sort of process it. As I get older randomly and I'm off the trucks now, I start to think about incidents a bit more, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but you think, oh, blimey, that was quite bad, especially like with, I never had sort of young kids, but the youngest I had in the job, she was about sort of 14 or 15. So especially when your kids start to get to that age and and it's all a bit sort of messy in your head, but it's not sort of brushed under. There's a whole load of support, and I think the best support is the watch, really.
Yeah. And was that ever there's a saying over here, it's kind of leave it all at the door. Don't bring it home to the family. Don't tell your family, about the things that you've seen or the stories and things that you have. Is that something that you kind of adopted? Was there really a line between your family life and what they knew about your job and the things that you would see or the things you had to do? And did you ever, speak to your partner about that? Did you ever tell your friends, your family, or was it kind of divided?
Probably a little bit of both. I don't think there's anyone I've gone into full sort of details. So say, for example, if somebody had died in a car accident, I might sort of say that, but I wouldn't if it was a particularly sort of like a messy one, which is a horrible sort of word to use, but you know what I mean. I wouldn't go into the details because there's no point putting that sort of trauma onto someone else. I remember my wife always saying that she kind of knew when I used to come home if I'd had a bad job or not, because I'd go a little bit sort of quiet and I wouldn't be as chatty as I was. And I didn't really sort of notice at the time, but I wasn't sort of at home sort of watching to TV and it going over consciously in my head, but it must have had some sort of effect on me to be sort of quiet. So it wasn't really a conscious decision to keep it in depth. But I mean, if I'm honest, I'm kind of like that as a person anyway. I'm not really one who opens up and immediately sort of talks about my feet. I mean, I've been through a few other things sort of outside of the job, but I know I've kind of pushed it down, which isn't a good thing. So I think that's probably a reflection of myself. But everyone's a little bit sort of different. A lot there's people who talk about everything and go to their wives and partners and things like that, and husbands, etc., and unload everything, and that's their coping mechanism. Mine is probably just a little bit of space, and I need to process it first. But I'd probably say there's only a handful that, which I don't know if is a good thing or a bad thing about my sort of mental state, but there was only a handful that I've sort of thought about since. The bulk of them, I'm quite good at compartmentalizing, if I can say that word, and sort of understanding it all, and especially when you're on the job, because you don't ever sort of think about it when you're doing it, because you've got a job to do and there's a load of tasks to do, and it's pretty responsive. But yeah, so I think everyone is different, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on here and telling your stories, man, because, it's great to hear. And I know a couple firefighters around here and a lot of police as well. And there's a few guys who maybe they don't have a partner, they don't have family, and it's literally just them, and they keep these stories and they retire and, they've done 35 years or 20 years and all of a sudden they all come back at once and they're like, how do I deal with this,
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in talking is the best way to get anything out, right? No matter who it's to, just having someone to listen to. So I'm sure everyone listening is going to appreciate you telling your stories as well. But I wanted to get into a little bit of what was your lifestyle like while you were a firefighter? I know over here, there's kind of a saying that with the schedule firefighters have, a lot of them, they'll be a firefighter full time, but then they also have a whole separate career full time they work as well. Because I think the schedule here is 2 days on, 2 days off. So they'll work, they'll do their job, they'll be in their station house, then they'll leave, and maybe they'll be an electrician part time or a carpenter or something. Is that similar in the UK, or is there no time? And what's the schedule like for you? Were you only a firefighter? Did you have anything on the side?
Yeah, so it's similar but not quite the same. So every service is sort of different in the UK. So if I speak of mine, so there's two main sort of shift patterns. There's the whole time, if you like, when you're a full-time for firefighter, and that's 2 days, but it's like sort of day hours. So 8 till 7, you do that for 2 days, and then you do 2 night shifts, which is 7 to 8, obviously. And then you have 4 days off. So we don't have any sort of 24-hour shifts like they do in America. And then there's another contract, which is and that tends, so there is a lot of free time in that. So I've done sort of little bits in that time, because obviously it's only really the 2-day shifts that you can't sort of work. So you could even sort of work in the day on your night shifts. Then you obviously got the 4 days off. It depends though, because the night shifts really take it out of you. Especially in recent years, there's been no beds on sort of stations. Although you're only there for 13 hours, it's all overnight. So there's not much. There is a lot of downtime. So people do have jobs, and I did, but the more hours you work, there were people who worked a lot of hours outside of their work, but they were tired a lot. Do you know what I mean? Whereas it was better to have a little bit of a part-time a job, and not everyone did. The bulk did to sort of top up the pay, because the pay isn't great. I mean, it's not bad by any means, but it's not a great, and the progression, unless you go for promotion, like that, there's no sort of grades or bandings that you go up every year. You're kind of stuck at the same wage unless you go for promotion. So I did a lot of PT work, and basically work that I could control the hours. So it wasn't necessarily working for another company that I'd work sort of 9 till 5. It was more a job like personal trainer and online coach, where I could sort of pick and choose the hours, and I could also adapt. So if I've had a busy sort of night shift, and it doesn't mean I have to go into, if like I finish early in the morning and then I don't want to go sort of straight to work. Some people did. The other contract that we have is like retained firefighters. So I don't know if you have an equivalent in America, but it's where you've essentially got a beeper at home, and then you commit a certain amount of hours of the week, and then a beeper will go off, and you've got to sort of drop what you're doing. That is meant to be a top up or a part time sort of role. So you have to have an agreement. Obviously, if you do that from your other work, obviously you've got to have an agreement with your manager. You can't sort of run out in the middle of Tesco's, if you're, or any other sort of supermarket. But there are a lot of people who work for local companies, and have got that agreement, or they'll have a job and then they'll do it when they're at home in the evening, for example, sort of overnight or at weekends. So they're the two main. So you're either there on station or you're at home, and it varies really.
Yeah. And I know that you kind of had your own path through your career and got a lot into the fitness side of it. And that kind of let you progress through your career as a firefighter as well and find your way into different roles. For someone who is starting, and I know the pay's probably changed a lot since you started. If I was, let's say I wanted to be a firefighter and I just wanted to stay in that role, didn't want to promote, just wanted to be running calls and working shifts like that, how would you say the lifestyle is? Do you think they're being paid fairly for the amount that they're being put through and for the lifestyle that they have to work on and off shifts, or do you think there's some room for improvement there?
Putting it bluntly, 100% no. I think it's way off. I mean, if we put it into perspective, so when you first join, it might have changed a little bit, but the recent sort of numbers. When you first join and you're in development, if you like, well, ignore that. That's not the point. But when you're a qualified sort of firefighter, the wage is about sort of 37,000 for 38,000. So that's pounds. I don't know what that is in America. But that won't change, and that's where the issue is. So, and to give you it, and our wages don't even go up with inflation. So when I first qualified as a firefighter, so like I say, 20 years ago, my wage was just under 30,000. So let's sort of round it up and say it was the 30,000. In 20 years, that wage has gone up to 7,000, which is miles behind 9 out of 10 jobs. I'm not saying every job that somebody might say an equivalent, but to me, we're miles behind everything. I don't think it's enough anyway, but also we're way down on inflation and if you're in a job for 20 years and your wage only goes up sort of $7,000, I mean, that is, to me, it doesn't make any sense. And that isn't, and obviously that would be bad in an office job, but let alone like the amount of skills that a firefighter has to learn, which is often sort of understated because everyone thinks it's just sort of squirting a bit of water and getting cats from trees and things like that, where there's so much, like the fire engine itself is kitted out with 50 bits of kit, and you've got to be like an expert on every one of them and know how to use them the best way, what's good and bad about it, etc., when to use it for what job, etc. There's like the qualifications, and not to mention like the stress and the trauma that you get on a daily, which you can get on a daily sort of basis. So I think we're way underpaid. If you want to go for promotion, then it goes up a little bit. So if you're at 37 now, there's the role above is called a crew manager over here, and that's about sort of 40, 41. So you're talking about $4,000 sort of pay rise. If you go up again to the watch manager, that's about sort of 43 to 46. So it's about sort of $9,000 more than a firefighter. And then beyond that, that's when you can earn sort of better money. So when you're a station manager, so a watch manager there's 4 watches sort of generally on a station. So a watch manager would be in charge of each of the 4 watches, of each of the colours, red, white, green and blue. And then you can become a station manager, which is above them. So then you'll be in charge of a few sort of stations. Then it's sort of, that starts at around sort of $50,000. and then it goes up. Then you become like an area manager and a group manager, etc. So that's, and then it goes up to sort of 70ish and up to an area manager. It's a lot of money, but if you take, say, for example, a station manager, which is a station manager slash to an area manager is like a director in a company, but there's a lot of responsibility. Obviously, there's sort of lives at stake and like etc. etc. And you run around between sort of 50 and 70 grand. Compare that to a director of like even like a small sort of company, you're way under what the job does, in my opinion. Obviously, it's linked to the council, and it's government funded, so that's essentially sort of why, because the government's, it's a worldwide sort of problem, but all the councils and governments have got no money, and there's sort of cuts here, there, and everywhere. So I appreciate it, but it's the same with sort of doctors and nurses. They're everyone, ambulance people, police. In my opinion, that like they're all underpaid for what they do. But that could be a podcast
Bigger
on its own.
problem. Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, I think, if there's anyone who's in a role and they have the responsibility of stopping you from dying, if you're in that situation,
Mm.
you want the people who are the most qualified, and those people are probably going to need to be paid the most,
Mm.
and the fact that you guys don't have a progression step, like we have a program over here called a step program, which basically means every year of service that you do, you're getting a cost of living raise, which is like 3%. But then on top of that, you're getting maybe a 4, 5, 6% raise
Oh wow, I
just for
didn't
a
know
year
that.
of service, so you would have, like, let's say law enforcement, you could have a patrol guy who's been there for 20 years. He's never promoted. He's only ever worked patrol, but he's making $110,000 a year, because
It's
he's just
amazing. Yeah.
so, but that guy knows everything,
Mm.
and wherever city he works, let's say, Tampa is a big city for us here in Florida. Been working for Tampa Police Department for 25, 30 years. Every street in that area you're assigned to work. You probably know every person. You've been through almost any call that you can experience, and you then pass that training on to other people. So now
Mm.
you have new guys coming up who are training, who are learning the same stuff. And my thought pattern would be, even in the UK, if you have guys, firefighters who get to that point where they're like, hey, I've been here 10 years and I've never had a real considerable raise for the amount of money and time that I've put into this career, it probably gets to that point where some guys maybe don't stay as long as they would, or they have to make a change. Or maybe in your situation, coming up and having younger kids, for a different person, when kids get older, they get more expensive, and you're like, I love this job, but I just can't afford to do it. So have you seen anyone who really loved the job, loved the career, but had to leave because they just couldn't afford to be a firefighter anymore? They couldn't pay for the lifestyle they had to have?
Yes, it's happened sort of quite a lot, and I think it's happening more and more. So when I joined, it was like a job that you'll have for life. There wasn't even a question. As soon as you join, you think, right, I know now I'm going to do this for the next sort of 30 for 40 years. The last probably 10 years, that's starting to change, because it was never a job that you do for money anyway. So even sort of 20 for 30 years ago, it wasn't a well-paid job. But because we're so far behind inflation now, it's getting so much harder. Now, the public generally, they're amazing with us, but sometimes we have a couple of comments saying, God, they're like, they don't do anything, they're lazy for firemen, and it's a good wage for kind of what you do. And that's where it kind of upsets us, because you kind of, I had a comment, going off piece a little bit, but I had a comment the other day. I put a post out, and it was just like a nutrition post in a firefighter group. So it was just how to eat well on station. It wasn't anything sort of technical. And randomly, this bloke commented. All he put at the bottom in the comment was overpaid, lazy, and then he put a rude word. And then it happens a lot, so I sort of brushed it under, and I made a sarky comment back. I'm not going to get into an argument with him, so I'm not going to, I was sort of a bit sort of too polite, really. A day after that, in Oxfordshire, over here, 2 firefighters died. Where there was like, I don't know if the news sort of have reached over there, but there was a big sort of factory fire. A member of the public died, and 2 firefighters died, sort of trying to get him out. And then a couple of weeks after that, we've had the events in Liverpool again. I don't know if you heard about the trophy parade, and
Yep.
there was people under cars, and the firefighter had to pick the car up, sort of get the car up to get the people out. And what upsets us and upsets me is there was a 9-year-old kid under that car. If that 9-year-old belonged to that bloke who wrote that comment, overpaid, lazy bleep, there's no way that he would have said that if that was his kid. And I think that's one of those things that it kind of grates that you feel like you have to justify why we want more money, and it's not because we're greedy or we want like to be sort of millionaires. All we want to do is to be kept up the same pay as any sort of supermarket worker. Do you know what I mean? And that's all we're asking for. But sorry, I went off on a bit of a rant then. But
No, that's a
um,
great point to make. Yeah. The fact that you just had to say that firefighters just want to be paid the same as like supermarket worker is a crazy statement to even hear you say in the first place, because it's one of those jobs. It's like no one likes the police, right, until their car gets stolen.
exactly.
Then they got a call, and for someone who's going to make a comment like that on social media, I guarantee if your house was on fire, you'd be pretty appreciative when guys like you showed up, is the big thing. So I know something, obviously I have a lot of friends in law enforcement, and something that kept them going is just knowing that you're still doing the greater good, right? Like you're still helping people, you're still showing up when people need it. And very rarely, I mean, I know from just talking with people over here, no one really dislikes firefighters when they show up. It's not the same for police. A lot of the time when the police
Yeah,
show up, it's a little different. But for firefighters, if you're there, normally they need to be there. Something's going on, someone needs help. And that's something, I'm not sure if it's the same over there, but here firefighters are also really medically trained as well. Is that similar in the UK? I know here, even in the college, before you graduate from, let's say fire school, if you want to call it that, you have to be certified as an EMT, which is like basically a paramedic. You have to have the same training. I think the mindset behind it is we get a lot of more medical calls than we get fires over
okay.
here. So, like, for example, anytime you see a police car pulling over, like let's say just a basic traffic accident, no major injuries, the fire department will always show up anyway, and sometimes they'll do the medical check before the ambulance. Is that similar in the UK, or is fire pretty much only dealing with structure or fire related issues?
No, it's not quite the same. So we are trained, but not to the same sort of level. I mean, it would be amazing if we could. So we're called we call it sort of FREC qualified, which is like a person on scene. So we're sort of trauma trained. So it's basically to patch people up until the ambulance arrive. That is sort of looking to change, and because with cuts now, we've got quite a close relationship. Well, we've got a close relationship with the police and the ambulance, but there is sort of talks of us sort of merging more with the ambulance, so we would be available for calls like that. The only time that does happen, so a couple of times we've been called for say if there's been, so there was a police car, an ambulance car where there was one person on it, and a bloke had a heart attack. So it's not normally a fire job. And he was doing sort of CPR, but there was like a 20-minute wait until the ambulance really. So obviously, so he was in a car, so couldn't sort of take the patient anywhere. So he phoned us to come and assist with CPR while they waited for a proper ambulance. So it is starting to happen that we're getting called to these jobs, but at the moment we wouldn't be a first port of call. I'm kind of half and half with that. Because over here it is a separate job. So part of me thinks, when I became a firefighter, I didn't want to be an ambulance driver. I would have been an ambulance driver. So but on the flip side, if my granddad or someone was having a heart attack across the road from a fire station, it seems ridiculous that we can't get called when we are sort of trained enough to do sort of CPR, and we're defib trained and things like that. So I think it is coming. In what form, we don't know. We've got like what they call a falls team, which is to assist the ambulance. So if an old person, for example, sort of phones up and says, I've fallen out of bed and I can't get back up, instead of sort of waiting for an ambulance, because our ambulances are overrun. I don't know if it's the same over there. And there's like a massive sort of like a shortage. So if there's a small job, then there is a chance that we could get called to assist. Our main argument with that is, though, because we're not EMT trained, or the equivalent, whatever it is over here, paramedic trained. If it's an old person who's fallen out of bed, we can put them into bed absolutely fine. There isn't any issue. If we get there and they've got a broken hip, or they've got other issues, or that's what we haven't got, that sort of level of qualification. So what somebody says over the phone and they sort of send us out, there is always a risk that we might have to deal with something we're not trained for. So it's like a chicken and egg thing, really. I think it's coming, but our argument is, well, we want to be trained properly first, then, if we are going to go to these sort of type of calls. So it doesn't happen at the moment, but it is sort of on the horizon, I think, over the next few years.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, really any skills that you can have that make you more capable at your job are always great additions, to have when you're going out there. Is there any, like, let's say, for example, is there any kind of specialty units or anything you can train your way into in the fire department? Like, I know ambulance, they have sometimes like helicopter response, or police may have, some kind of drug unit or an undercover unit or something like that. Is there any equivalent in the fire department where you can go that kind of specialty route?
Yeah, there is. Unfortunately, there's nothing as exciting as helicopters or like a SWAT team or anything like that, because that would be pretty cool. But there's nothing that exciting. But there is sort of the different departments. So we have like a big, obviously, sort of like a fire safety department, which is really dull, but it's really essential to the community. So that's when you go into sort of risk assessments and checks for businesses. But then in the department, you get all the qualifications that you need. We've got a learning and development department, obviously, so you can become a trainer in everything. There's myself dependent. So there's a fitness department in my brigade, because we're quite a small service. It's only me, so I do everything, and then I manage like a team of PTs who do the bulk of the actual sort of testing. But in terms of like the policy recording and research and all that, that's me. But then if we've got a neighbouring service which is a lot bigger, and it's like a Met Brigade, they're called, which means it's a big sort of city, and they've got like an equivalent of me. They've got a fitness manager, they've got like a nutritionist, and things like that. So in certain brigades, you'll have options there. The stations themselves, some of the stations themselves have individual sorts of specialities as well. So the two main stations I worked at, which was Burton and Tamworth. So Burton is an aerial ladder platforms station, which is like the massive sort of ladder which sort of uncurls and then extends, which is like a specialism. So they're not at every sort of station. Every station has a normal sort of ladder that goes on the back of the fire station, but this is like a 30-meter high sort of ladder. And then there's sort of water stations, which was where I was in Tamworth. So that means you're trained to go into water and save people in flood water and rivers and things like that. And you'll have a little boat as well. And then there's rope rescue stations where you do all the pulleys and things like that. Animal rescue is another one. So if there's because we have a lot of sort of rural areas as well, so they have a load of kit that's sort of specific to animals. So you do on stations sort of level that half the stations are probably just sort of standard fire stations, but then the other half have got like a specialism. But then you can sort of change department, which is what I did completely, and come off the trucks, if you like, and went up to headquarters. And then, so for example, I'm doing the fitness, but there are a couple of options
That you can go into. Yeah. No, that's good. I think diversity always helps people stay longer too, right?
definitely.
But no, that segues nicely. I did want to talk a little bit about your journey from going into the fire service into the fitness side of it, and kind of how you ended up going there. Have you always been a pretty physically fit guy? Has that always been part of your life? And did that just kind of segue into your job, or how did you end up getting that opportunity?
And not always. I wasn't always known as the fittest player. It's always been an interest to me. I mean, I had the stereotypical journey when I was at school. Going way, don't worry, it's not a long story. But when I was at school, I was quite an overweight kid, but I was quite sort of sporty, even though I was overweight. So I was in like the football team and played sort of different sports. And then I lost a lot of weight in my teens, and that sort of sparked like an interest in fitness. I wouldn't say I was an athlete by any means at all or anything like that. And like I say, so I joined in the fire service in 2006, about sort of 2011, 12, a bit later than that, 14 or 15, I became a PT, and I did that for the service, but I only done sort of bits and bobs really. And that like evoked my interest. And that's when I set up my outside sort of business and things like that. So I'm quite like a nerd of it as well. So I wouldn't say, I haven't got a six pack or anything like that. I'm not one of these like on social media who sort of films myself doing 100 curls and things like that. But it's definitely been an interest, and I love the nerdy side of it. Like in the
Yeah.
fire service, kind of, it gives you that opportunity, because I like to know, well, why are we doing that test? Why is that the standard? And you can sort of delve in and read research and speak to other brigades and speak to academics and things like that. And that interest has grew more and more since I've got sort of this role. I think that's been the biggest change, as my brain's like exploded, because after 17 years on the truck, you tend to not go through the motions. I mean, I was good at my job, but there wasn't anything to surprise you anymore. So I was kind of, a lot of it was on autopilot, and I got to the stage where I was going to big sort of jobs that on the face of it were quite sort of big jobs, but I wasn't getting the same excitement out of it. And I thought it's not a great sort of mindset to be in, really, when there's hundreds of thousands of people who want this job, and I'm just sort of going through the motions a little bit. So I thought I'd go for a change. I was really lucky as well, because my role I've got now permanently came up initially as temporary. So it was a 6-month temporary. So it gave me the opportunity to give it a go for 6 months. If I didn't like it, I didn't. Because now I've gone to like a 9 till 5, sort of like a shift pattern as well. So it gave me a chance to to kind of try that out for 6 months. If I didn't like it, then I could go back on station and then it'd be fine. But I've not looked back really, and I think it's kind of helped being a firefighter as well. So because I opens up a lot of doors. So when I go onto stations and speak to people, I've got that sort of layer of not necessarily a respect, but because I've done what they've done, they kind of sort of have taken a notice a bit more, rather than someone who's come from the private industry or fresh from uni or worked at a gym or whatever, and they've never worked with firefighters and the shift work and the stresses and blah 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 that we spoke about before. Because I've sort of lived that, I can have a pretty good guess about sort of what's going to work, what's not going to work, what's a bit fluff and a bit sort of men's health sort of magazine that is a bit sort of generic, and what it gives me a chance to help people really bespoke, because I've sort of been there, so I can kind of cut 80% of the chatting because I know what's practical and what's not really.
I mean, you're just speaking from a credibility point. I think people will listen because the things that you're telling them to do come from a point of, knowing that you've experienced the same things, or you've probably experienced things that they haven't experienced yet. And you say, hey, it's really important for you to know how to do X, Y, and Z, or be strong in these areas, because this is probably something that you're going to run into. And this is something that I used, to get better in this area, or even just fitness itself, just maintaining that mindset of knowing, hey, as long as it's a long career, 20, 25 years, and it's physically straining, and the best thing you can do for your body is keep it active, So are you doing mostly, I know you're training for your job, so you're going to these different station houses, but what made you want to branch out, kind of do your own thing and get into the private fitness training area as well?
I think ultimately it was to help sort of more people, because I do what I can at work, and that is I suppose I spend more hours on that. But the fact I could speak to someone in America, in Scotland, in Australia, and I could help them as well, that kind of was quite exciting for me. And then it gave me a chance to kind of have a look at the tests that their fire service does. Then I can help them individually as well. So what I avoided doing was, I haven't got like a firefighter workout, for example, that I can just sort of send out. Everything is sort of bespoke for the individual and what they need and what they want. And to me, that having that sort of reach was quite exciting. And that's one of the biggest things I wanted to concentrate on now. It's not about the money. It's just about sort of building a community. And for me, I'd love that. I'd love to have like have like a hub, I suppose, which sounds a bit sort of cheesy, but it becomes like a go-to place for everything health and fitness and fire service, police, or military sort of based, where everyone can put in, because everywhere is completely different around the world, obviously, and everyone's sort of standards are different. So to have a central hub where I can help as many people as possible was really exciting. Where I'm really sort of lucky, because as we said earlier, a lot of firefighters have other jobs. Nine times out of 10, they're not really helpful to each other, where mine is so sort of overlapped. So if I spend a lot of time sort of researching an issue in the fire service, for example, that's only going to help my outside business, and vice versa. So I've brought a lot of what I do on my outside work into my fire service role, because I know kind of what works. I know I've worked with a lot of clients and things like that, whether it's worked for someone who had a shoulder injury, he's in his late sort of 50s, for example. But then when I speak to a firefighter at work, who's going through the same thing, I can just sort of get all that information and transport it to him or her. So I'm really sort of lucky in that respect, where one sort of complements the other. But yeah, I think it's just, to answer your question, it's just to help as many people as possible.
Yeah. Do you think it's tied into your mindset as well of being in the fire service for so long and showing up and solving a problem? Having someone reach out to you and say, hey, I need to lose weight, or I have this injury, or I'm trying to improve here. And you kind of have the tools or the techniques to fix that, or help them or get them into a better situation. Do you think that kind of mentally ties back into your career that you had, being that you were the guy who was part of a team who would show up and help people?
100%. And I'd say, even sort of if it's conscious or subconsciously, but it's that I'm very much a practical person, in that if someone says to me, I want to lose a bit of weight, or, I'm struggling with this sort of fitness test, I'd want them to go away with, and doesn't mean they have to sign up to the program. It could just be a phone call, or I'll send them some free stuff. I want them to go away with something that they can physically do or actively do. I hate the world of fluff in the fitness industry. There's sort of so much where there's a lot of words, but you actually sort of have a look at what they're saying. They're not actually giving you anything to do. So I very much give people something that will help. It's not just sort of guidance and general advice and stuff you can get off sort of Google. It's very much, I kind of want to solve their problem. And it's not always a perfect science, obviously. And there is a lot of sort of trial and error, and what will work for somebody might not work for everyone. But the whole point of it's a journey. Coincidentally, I spoke to someone today in one of their weekly sort of check-in calls, and he's only been with me probably 6 weeks now, but he's had such a massive sort of change. He kept sort of thanking me, saying, I've tried a lot of stuff before and nothing's worked. But he was a firefighter. He's a younger than me, but he's working his way up the ranks, so he's doing better than me already. But he says, I've tried a lot of stuff before, and he wasn't sort of new to training. He knew enough, but it's everything that's attached to it. Is how you take that information and implement it. Someone once sort of said to me, and it's dead sort of cheesy again, so apologies, but he says there isn't an information problem, there's an implementation problem in like the fitness world. And it's so true, because I'm not saying anything that's sort of like a bit of magic and I've invented an exercise that no one's ever heard of. You can get all the information that you can about exercise off the internet. Where the issues come and what makes a good coach and what makes sort of program work is how you build that into your life, your individual life, and your sort of lifestyle and likes and dislikes and injury history and etc. And the accountability side, I suppose, all that is what makes a program work. It's not doing sort of 10 reps of 10 of a particular exercise. And that's the biggest thing, and that's what I get the biggest sort of buzz out. If somebody comes to me and say, yeah, but like my weight's the same, but I've learned how to love exercising again, or at least it's part of my sort of week. So there's not many people who love exercise, to be fair. I'll take that back. But if there's a lot of people who have got to make exercise a consistent part of their life, which is a massive win. You're going to have sort of good days and bad weeks and things like that. You're going to put on weight and lose weight. So it's not always about being perfect, but just having exercise, some sort of exercise, a part of your life is a massive sort of win for me. And that's as big as a buzz than somebody says, oh, I've lost sort of 2 stone. The fact that I've got someone to do something consistently that I know in the long term, 20, 30 years, is only going to help them is a big buzz for me.
Where can people find you if they're trying to get in touch with you for training or just to hear more of your stories? Where's the best place for them to get in touch with you?
So there's a couple of ways. The main way is Instagram. I'm not a big Instagrammer. Like I say, I'm not one of these sort of people in the gym, but in terms of sort of filming myself, there's a lot on there. So that's Mark Pearce Coaching. I've also got a Facebook page, which is Mark Pearce. A bit more complicated, this one. So it's Mark Pearce. It's TSAC, which is a qualification, NSCA, which is obviously a big training company in America. So they do a strength and conditioning qualification for tactical athletes. And stupidly, I got excited when I got that qualification. I stuck it on the end of my name for my Facebook account, but it's really hard to say out loud. It looks fine written. So that's Mark Pearce, TSCA-F. But
Gotcha.
like I say, if you start with Mark Pearce Coaching on Instagram, and all I'd say is to start the conversation. I give a lot away for free. I've got a load of for free resources. All I want to do is build a community. I just want people to come to me, ask a question. If I don't know the answer, I'll find out. I'm not a salesman. I'm not like a cheesy sort of a salesy sort of person. I've had a few sort of people in the past saying I probably do sort of too much and I should start to charge more than what I do and things like that. But for me, that's not what I'm about. I'm lucky because I've got my full-time job, so it isn't my main sort of source of income. That isn't the drive of me to doing it. I just want to help people. So yeah, so just sort of reach out, start the conversation.
Yeah, and my last question would be, anyone who's listening, who's thinking about getting into the fire service, what would your words be to them? What would your advice be? What kind of mindset should they have, and what would kind of be your final piece to them?
I suppose the biggest thing is enthusiasm and an open mind. I think the best recruits that make the best firefighters, if that makes sense, are the ones who just sort of get sort of stuck in and don't hide. Not everyone comes in sort of perfect. Even like after their training course and they come onto station, the best ones are they kind of know their sort of weak points and they get sort of stuck in and don't avoid stuff. Just sort of say yes to everything. Keep working hard as you can. Ask loads of questions. We've had examples over the years of, say, for example, someone's not very confident on the radio. So when you're on the truck and you send a radio message, it goes out to the whole of the county. And that's at the beginning, it's hard to get that out of your mind because then you stumble over your words because you think not that anyone is listening, but for theoretically they could. So because they're a bit sort of shy about it, then they avoid it and they pass it on to someone else or don't do it, and that's only going to make it worse. So if there's something you don't know, ask a question. For something you're not very good at, just keep doing it. Especially like in a training environment, it's better to mess up there than out on a job. But ask questions and be keen is probably the best thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put all your links, everything to get in touch with you down in the description as well. Mark, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for telling your story. I'm glad we got to touch on everything that we wanted to talk about, and I think people are really going to enjoy listening to your life and what you've had to do. So again, thank you so much for coming on.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot for having me. Enjoyed it.